I'm going to continue my commentary on this book right here. And today we're going to talk about temples. What about temples? Okay. How do you think kings came into power back in the first century? I know the first thing you're going to say. Well, doesn't God put kings up and put kings down? Yes, he does. We're talking about the method here. Now, if you're talking about first century Jerusalem, here's how it worked. A king would get old, he would pass away, and just before he did, a divine dream or whatever the heck it would be would come upon some Jewish priest by God himself, and God would say, look, I want this person to be king of all of Jerusalem. And this person would say, okay. So this priest would find this person who was to be the next king and anoint them, and as soon as they were anointed, they were king. That's a pretty peaceful way to bring a king up into power. Unfortunately, that wasn't the way it worked in other societies, like the Egyptians, the Romans, the Babylonians. Usually, it was because of a war, and whichever king won the war, that was your new king. And he was king for life, unless he got killed, and then his children would be your king. If you killed that king, watch out, you were going to be next in line to die. So, there you go. But one of the first buildings that was ever built after a land was either conquered, or in the case of Jerusalem, it was divine instructions by God to build it. Okay? So, either it was divine instructions by God, or it was a war that occurred. The first thing that would be built is a temple. Why a temple? Well, it was a gathering place. Okay, people would gather at a temple. Whether it be Roman temples, Egyptian temples, Babylonian temples, or even the Temple of Jerusalem. They would gather to worship at the temple. And the temple would have traditions. Now, if you're talking about Jewish traditions, you're talking about the Passover feast, the Feast of Tabernacles. There are actually 7 feasts. I'm sure you've heard of the 7 feasts of Jerusalem. There you go. So there was your traditions. They would set up traditions, and that would be a basic way that they would keep track of time. You know, they would invent their calendars around their festivals and that kind of thing. All right? Now then, pagan temples, they had their own holidays. They had their own little traditions. And like I said, even with pagans, they would help, the temples would help them keep track of time because of feasts and everything else. That's a good motivator to keep an accurate calendar because you want to celebrate a feast at a specific time. Now, why else would a temple be built? Well, because people would gather around it, and they lived very close to it, because you don't want to walk hundreds of miles to worship at a temple. So you want to be as close to the temple as you can get. It was also a sign of stability. If you put that temple there, what you were basically saying was, my kingdom is established, and it's going to take a mighty war to knock it down. And this would give the people confidence that they were living in a society that was not going to be destroyed next week. They'd have to live in fear. See what I mean? And it was also a statement of continuity. In other words, this temple's been around for X amount of time, and it's going to be around for the foreseeable future, whether you like it or not. So it gave the people confidence that when they woke up the next morning, they were going to be ruled by a new king. And when people have confidence, they're more productive. See what I mean? So, that's basically how that worked. Alright, I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.